Well, thank you one and all for joining me again today. This is your host, ID Jester. We're doing part 12 of our Advanced Squad Leader 15-minute rules set. Today we're going to be talking about routing, which is in Section A of the rulebook, subsection 10.5. In fact, the next 3 episodes I think are going to be specifically designed around routing. First episode here, we're going to introduce a few rules on the routing, not talk about everything, give some examples. Next episode, we're going to introduce a few more rules with routing, give some more examples, and maybe the third video, finish that up and have more of a comprehensive routing example. And hopefully with these 3 episodes, we'll be able to complete our routing phase of our Advanced Squad Leader rules. 10.5 says, during a rout phase, a broken unit not in melee may not remain in the same open ground hex in the normal range and line of sight of a known non-melee enemy unit, nor, regardless of terrain, may it end a rout phase adjacent to or in the same location with a known enemy unit that is both unbroken and armed. You can see we have quite a bit of yellow and quite a bit of green. The green kind of stand out the rules that are kind of the basics, but of course we do have quite a bit of yellow rules we need to look at as well. Broken units may not rout. Broken units must rout away, attacker first, 1 unit at a time, during the rout phase, or be eliminated for failure to rout. A broken unit may not rout if a broken unit may rout if currently under a DM counter. All broken units are going to receive 6 movement factors in the rout phase. The exception is a wounded single man counter only has 3 movement factors, and this amount can never be increased. A broken unit may end its rout phase in an open ground hex in the line of sight and normal range of a known enemy unit without interdiction, only if it uses low crawl. We're not going to be talking about rule crawl. That'll be a rule we'll add on later. Broken units may not use bypass. Section 10.51 direction. This is the important thing here. We're going to look at the green first, right here. Assuming you can abide by the previous requirements, which we'll talk about here in a second, a routing unit must move to the nearest building or wood hex. So that's the basic information. As long as it can apply these other rules and everything, it must move to the nearest building or wood hex. Let's look at the rule specifically on this. A routing unit may never rout towards a known enemy armed unit, even if the enemy unit is broken or disrupted, while in that enemy's line of sight, in any way which decreases the range and hexes between the routing unit and the armed enemy unit. Nor may it move towards such an enemy after leaving its line of sight during that rout phase. So basically, once you know of an enemy, even if you're routing away and you go behind a building and you can't see that enemy anymore, you can't alter your route because you can't see that unit anymore. Once you know of a unit, you know of it whether you can see it or not. Nor if adjacent to a known and armed enemy unit may it rout into another hex adjacent to the same enemy unit. A routing unit may never move adjacent to a known enemy unit, and thus doing so, it is leaving that enemy unit's location, which kind of makes sense. If you're in the same hex as an enemy unit, you're going to have to move out of that hex. You're going to be adjacent to it. So the only time that is ever possible is if you're in the same location as an enemy unit. Assuming it can abide by the previous requirements, a routing unit must move to the nearest building or wood hex, and that's calculated with movement factors at the start of your rout phase. At the start of the rout phase, a routing unit must designate its destination and must attempt to reach it during that rout phase. If a newly known enemy unit prevents this, a new destination is refigured from that point. Upon reaching the building or woods location not adjacent to a known enemy unit, a routing unit must stop and end its route in that building or woods location, even if it's overstacked, unless the unit can directly enter another building or woods location in its next hex. A routing unit may also ignore building or wood hexes if that hex is no farther from a known enemy unit than its starting hex, even if it must route through that now ignored hex to reach its destination. We're going to look at row crawl and a couple of the other rules, interdiction, next episode. When we're talking about open ground, we're talking section 10.53. For the purposes of rout, an open ground hex is any hex in which an interdictor could apply a hypothetical defensive first fire of -1 FFMO. We haven't talked about defensive fire. We haven't talked about the different modifiers for first fire, move in the open, and what that all means. So if you don't understand that, this is okay. We'll cover that when we get to that section of the rule book with defensive fire. Here's kind of a breakdown of the rules we just talked about, though, kind of in a neat little format here to kind of make things a little more easier to understand. So a unit that can rout. It's a broken unit currently marked with a DM counter. It's as simple as it gets. Units that can rout are a broken unit currently marked with a DM counter. There's a very important exception to that, and that's an unbroken leader that can rout with that unit. So it's the only thing that can actually rout that's not broken or with a DM counter is an unbroken leader that actually routes with a unit. So that can be an invaluable asset for your routing units. Units that are forced to rout, so not everything is automatically forced to rout. Units that are forced to rout are broken units adjacent to an unbroken enemy unit, and broken units in an open ground location in the normal range and line of sight of a good order enemy unit. Remember our open ground location, we'll talk about that here shortly. Routing movement factors, you're going to get 6 movement factors, except for wounded leaders, which get 3 movement factors. Remember, this can never be increased, so you don't get any kind of leader bonuses or any bypass or anything like that. How do I route? You're going to route to the closest building or wood hex. All ties are chosen by the player that is routing. So if you have 3 buildings that are 5 movement factors away, you can choose which one of these to go to. You can ignore hexes that are not farther away from enemy units, and also same building hexes. Choosing a destination, you're going to choose either wood or building hex if it can be reached in the current movement phase with your 6 movement factors, or if you're a wounded leader, you're going to have 3 movement factors. And routing movement, you're going to never move closer to an enemy known unit or into another hex adjacent to the same known enemy unit. You're not going to use any bypass movement. Newly known enemies can alter the direction and the destination hex, and you must stop when arriving into the destination hex unless you can enter an adjacent building or woods hex. Alright, so we did cover a lot of rules. Let's show you some examples and see how this all applies. So I've got a couple examples set up. Right now we're just considered row Q, and to the left of that, everything else just ignore. We're going to talk about some of these other examples in a further episode, but from right now just ignore these counters. Row Q and over are the counters we're interested in. You can see we are in the German phase, and we are talking about well, let's go to the right phase first of all. We are going to the rout phase. There we go. We're in the German player, and we're in the rout phase here. So the German player must rout his units if he has to, and only units that have a DM counter can rout. So let's look at G9 here. If we look at G9, he is in a woods hex. So G9 does not have to rout if he does not want to rout. If he wants to rout, he would have to rout into H9, because that is his closest wood or building hex that is not closer to any known enemy unit. In fact, 1, 2, 3, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes, so it's not any closer to this unit. This unit's 1, 2, 3. This is 3. So yes, he could actually decide to route into this hex. And the reason he might want to actually do that is if he routes into this hex, he could then move into this adjacent hex, which is a building or wood hex. and move into that position right there, which would keep him from maybe getting some attacks from other units. And that way his DM counter, if you watched our last episode, might be removed, and he can try to rally that unit a lot easier if it's not being shot at all the time. Next example, let's look at G5 here. We got another German unit here. It is 2 units away from this hex. It is in an orchard field. This unit can choose to route if it wishes. It is 2 hexes away from this unit. And this is, what is it? That's a German unit. That is an American unit. There's an American unit. There's an American unit. And there's a German unit. Okay, so he decides that he wants to route this unit. He is going to choose F4 as his designated hex. Can he do that legally within the rules? Well, let's see. Is it any closer to a known enemy unit? He knows about this unit. He knows about this one. He knows about this one. This one is 1, 2, 3 hexes away. This building hex is 1, 2, 3 hexes away, so it's not any farther. So he could choose to ignore that hex if he wanted to. But for the German player, he does want to get that unit in that hex because it's got a leader in his hex, and that leader will hopefully help rally that unit. So this unit will then move into that hex and complete its route. Next, we look at this unit in I4. So he is under a DM counter, although he's not broken. Let's go ahead and break this guy. There we go. A little error on my part. Sorry about that, folks. So we got a broken unit here, German. It is an I4. It chooses, let's see what he is out in the open. So this unit must, he must route if he's in the line of sight of a known enemy unit. He is. So we have an American broken unit in J2, but remember, broken units still alter where you can route to. That's one of the deficits of being the attacking player. You get to go first, and that could change how your routing options go. So he's going to choose the closest wood or building hex that's not any closer to an enemy unit. So the closest building for him is going to be either I3 or H3. He can't go into I3 because he would be moving closer to a known enemy unit, even though that unit's broken. So he can't move into I3. He would have to go into H3. This unit is 1, 2, 3, well, let's see, 1, 2, 3, and that is 3 hexes away, so he's not moving any closer to an enemy unit. He could choose to ignore this because it's not any farther away from an enemy unit, but in this case, he chooses not to ignore it, and he will route into that hex, and he will be done with his route as well. Sometimes I have to double check what I'm doing just to make sure. Alright, now we have, that is, oh no, we got one more German unit over here. And he's in O1 here, and he is out in the open. He's in the line of sight of a known enemy unit within normal range, so he must route. There's no choice, he has to route. So he's going to go to the closest wood or building hex. The closest one is going to be in P2. So he can spend 2 movement factors to move in there. And he could stop if he wanted to, or he can choose to move into an adjacent wood or building hex. And in this case, the German player does have him move into Q2. Again, we're going to ignore all of those counters. They're not in the game at this point. Just Q and over is what we were talking about. The reason you might want to do this again is because this way the enemy unit might not be able to put some firepower into that hex because of this building in front of it. And that way he won't get his DM counter back, and maybe he can rally that unit quickly and get it back into the action. So that is the German player turn. When the German player is completely done with his routes, it is now up to the American player. The American player only has one unit, which is this one right here. It is in J2. It's not adjacent to a known enemy armed unit, and it's not in an open hex, so he can choose to stay there if he wanted to. And he could choose to route away if that was another possibility, if he had somewhere to go. that was in the line of sight of a known enemy unit. Now, this German unit that had ran away, I'm not sure line of sight. Let's look at our line of sight here. Line of sight. If he goes between those two hexes, oh, he can't actually see that unit right there, so he does not know about that unit. He could actually route 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nope, that's too far away, so he couldn't go into that hex. He could stay in this hex, and he's just afraid that if he stays in that hex, this German unit's just going to keep shooting at it. He could actually route into K1. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So he could actually route into that hex. His closest woods or building hex is I3, which he can ignore I3 because it is not any farther away from this unit here. So he can ignore this hex. So he can choose either I0 or K1. If he wanted to route, he could choose one of those two hexes to route into. And then once he routed into that hex, he could then continue his route, because he does not know about this known enemy unit back there, because he doesn't have line of sight to it. So he could if he wanted to, but this would bring up another situation which we haven't talked about, which will come up next episode, where we're talking about moving out into the open and being interdicted by enemy units that you can see now. And he would risk interdiction to go into that hex, but it might be worth it, because once he does, he could then go into this hex here. So it cost him one movement factor. Oops, come on back here. One movement factor to move into that hex. 2 movement factors to move into that hex. So he spent 3 movement factors. And then he can spend 2 more movement factors to move into an immediate adjacent hex, which would be 5 movement factors. And he would end his turn. Again, the advantage of that is he's got these buildings in front, so enemy units aren't going to be able to target him. Once he gets his DM counter removed, he will be able to hopefully rally his troops back to the battlefield quickly. So there's a kind of a overview of rallying, but again, we haven't covered all the rules. That'll be coming up in part 2, where we're talking about interdiction and what all that means. Low crawl, this is another opportunity. This guy could actually, he could low crawl back to this space here, which might be a good option for him. Let's see. He doesn't know about this unit now because his line of sight's blocked. That's unit he doesn't know because that line of sight. Lastly, quickly, over here, just as a quick example, we have a German unit right here. One thing I did want to show you is he is adjacent to these units here. When he goes to route, he would obviously go to the nearest building or wood hex, which would be W3. If he decides to go into W3, which of course is his only valid option, he's still adjacent to the same enemy unit. So in this case, this unit can't route, and will be eliminated for failure to route, or he'll surrender, one or the other. So that's basically how that happens. If you get these situations where you have enemy units and you're not able to route into a valid spot, you will be eliminated, or you will surrender, which we'll obviously get into later on in our rule set. So thanks so much for watching. This is part 1 of our routing. Be sure to stop in and watch part 2 to come shortly. Thanks a lot.